got a new thing where I can see the chat from Facebook and YouTube all at the same time, which will be really nice. So once I get a couple of people saying hello to me out there, I've got some interesting things to tell you about. I know this was kind of just a stream that wasn't really scheduled or anything. If anybody's out there, send me a chat. Let me know that you can hear me if you're on Facebook or if you're on YouTube. I probably should have tested this. Again, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants on this one. So, give me just 1 second. Let me see if anybody is listening to me. Well, it looks like I am definitely on Facebook. And, oh, hey, chat is working. Awesome. Okay, look at this. I've got chat. I can bring it up. I can see Facebook. I can see YouTube. Outstanding. Virginia up in this. All right. Way cool. Okay, so I got one chat thing. I can see YouTube. I can see Facebook. This has been so painful having to go back and forth between everything. So outstanding. Way cool. I'm very, very happy about that. So, with that said, looks like reading the chat might be a little bit difficult on that. Let's see here. If I did... Okay, that is good. I can definitely see chat right there. Nice. Okay. So a couple things to talk about. Testing some settings, which we just kind of did. Breaking news. This blew me away. I got a phone call today from an inspection agency, and I'm waiting for my friend from UL to call me. This blew my mind. I'll tell you about it. We've got some upcoming events to talk about as well, and I'll post some registration things so that you can see that. And then we'll talk a little bit of code too, since you guys are here, and it's like, is he just gonna break news or what? So I got a phone call this morning, a couple of hours ago, from a local inspection agency that's maybe 20 miles away from me. And they said, we have an electrician who gave us a call and was freaked out, and he had us come out and take a look at this cable that he had. I know it might be a little bit hard to see, but can you see what's going on in this NM cable? You've got the bare equipment grounding conductor, and you've got the white neutral and the black ungrounded conductor. This is 12-2 with a 14 gauge hot conductor. That black wire is 14 gauge. And this was manufactured on 11/26 of 19. So they have installed this in like 10 houses. And they just started trimming them out this morning, and they caught it. And they called the building department and said, "Hey, we've got major problems here. What's going on? What should we do?" And they contacted UL. UL is going to investigate it and probably issue some sort of a recall notice. I've got a call in with my buddy from UL, and I'll let you guys know what he has to say. But that was rather surprising. So I'm not going to mention who the manufacturer is, but I will say if you're using NM cable, take a look at the stamp date, because who knows how many miles of this stuff they made where the hot conductor is smaller than the neutral conductor. So that's kind of a bummer there. Upcoming events. I've been working with IEC lately, and they contacted me and wanted me to do a 4-part webinar series, and they decided that they're going to make it open for everybody. So it's a 4-part webinar series for IEC and for everyone else, and it's free. So we've got that going. It'll be the next 4 Wednesdays, and they're each going to be about 90 minutes, give or take. They're going to start at 3 p.m. Eastern and go until 4:30 Eastern. We'll be live streaming the series as well, and we'll also post it up on YouTube and Facebook and everything after it's over. So if you can't attend the live event, you can certainly watch it afterward as well. So we've got that coming up. This coming Wednesday, 4/29, we'll be talking about working space. So 110.26, one of my favorite topics to talk about in the NEC. It's a big section. 110.26 is almost 2 full pages in your code book, and it's 2 full pages dedicated to protecting the electrician. That's the whole idea behind 110.26. So we're going to cover that in great detail. The next Wednesday on May 6th, we're going to be talking about GFCI protection with emphasis on the 2020 NEC changes. So we'll talk initially about what a GFCI is, how it works, and then we're going to get into the requirements in the NEC. We'll spend most of our time in 210.8, the general requirements for GFCIs, and we'll talk about where they're required. And again, we'll emphasize what changed in the 2020 NEC. After that, we'll probably talk a little bit about Article 422 appliances, and then, time permitting, we'll talk a little bit about swimming pools and marinas and boatyards and other areas where GFCIs are required. The next week on 5/13 and the week following on 5/20 will be parts 1 and 2 of NEC changes in the 2020 code. So obviously, we can't cover all of the changes in the code in 3 hours, and we're certainly not going to try that. We're not going to cover GFCIs in those 2 because we'll have covered that the previous week. But we'll talk about services, and we'll talk about Article 110. We'll talk about some changes in chapters 4 through 7. So quite a lot changed in the 2020 NEC, and we're going to spend a great deal of time talking about that. So those are coming up. Again, I'll post links on how you can get registered for them, or you can just join the live stream. All right, it looks like the chat thing is working. So a comment: if you cut in when you rough, you should find this well before the walls were closed. Okay, so the NM cable thing. I was thinking about that too, because normally in my area they do make it up as they go. But really, if all you have is a 12-2 coming in and a 12-2 going out, I don't know that you would catch that, because you'd strip the cable jacket and you'd make up the equipment grounds, but the black and the white you would just stuff in the back of the box. I think if you had, 1 cable going in and 2 going out, so 3 12-2s in a box, then you might catch it. But I can see how it slipped through the cracks. So this was kind of a tough thing. But like I said, they contacted UL and the manufacturer, and we'll see what happens. But man, that sucks. I really hope. I mean, let's be honest here. This electrician, hats off to them, because they caught it and they were honest, and they didn't try to just cover, because they could have got away with it. I mean, I say got away with it. It's not like they tried to do anything, but they could have put the devices in and probably nobody would have known. But they did the right thing and told everybody. My real concern, though, man, is how much of this stuff was manufactured, and let's be honest, how much of it went to like Lowe's or Home Depot, where a homeowner might not even know what they're dealing with here. So I hope they only manufactured a little bit of it, and I hope it only went to this area, and we can get a grasp on it. But we'll see what happens. Kind of a bad deal, man. All right, I'm kind of liking seeing all the chat. That's nice. All right, let's go back over to here. Let's talk code for a minute. A couple of changes in the 2020 NEC in Article 230. By the way, are you guys tired of not being able to get your hair cut? It's killing me. 230.71, maximum number of service disconnects. Unless allowed in 230.71b, every service must have a single disconnecting means. This is one of the biggest changes in the NEC, in my opinion. In some areas, this might hit harder than others, But I think this is a big deal. So one service, one disconnect. That's the requirement. So the 2 to 6 breakers or sets of disconnects is essentially gone. You can still do the 2 to 6 disconnects, but it's much, much more difficult. 230.71b recognizes the 2 to 6. Each service or each set of service conductors that are allowed in 230.40 exceptions 1, 3, 4, or 5 may have up to 6 disconnects consisting of any of the following. Okay, so number 1, I can still use up to 6 disconnects if I have separate enclosures with a single disconnect in each. So here is my service lateral. It goes into this junction box, extends in, I'm guessing like a CT enclosure, I should say, and then goes out through the wireway, and it hits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 service disconnects in 6 separate enclosures. So this would be permitted, 6 disconnects in 6 enclosures. I could also have multiple panel boards, up to 6 panel boards, with a single service disconnect in each enclosure. So maybe I have a 200 amp panel for my house, a 200 amp service. I could have 2 100 amp panels, each with a 100 amp service disconnect. So this would be allowed. Another option is for switchboards with a single service disconnect in each vertical section and barriers between the vertical sections that isolate them. So here is my utility section here, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vertical sections, each with 1 service disconnect. Now, I'm not sure if that's really economically feasible or viable. I don't know. It seems like that's a lot of work to just avoid having 1 service disconnect. But one of the things that you used to see in switchboards is if we had a 480 volt service, if we wanted 1200 amps, instead of putting in a 1200 amp breaker, we would use 2 600 amp breakers for my service disconnects. And what that did is that got me out of the ground fault protection of equipment requirement in 230.95. And I think we're going to see less of that now, because that, to value engineer your way out of the GFPE, you're not saving money by adding a whole nother vertical switchboard, I wouldn't think. So that's another option for the 2 to 6 disconnects. Or item 4, switch gear or meter centers that have separate disconnects in individual compartments. Let's take a look at this. Here I've got 6 disconnects, but they would have to be in individual compartments. And those of you guys that are familiar with this piece of equipment know that they are not in individual compartments. If I take off this cover right here, this L-shaped cover, it's one continuous compartment. So that does not comply. So I need to have 1 disconnect per service unless it's in individual compartments or individual enclosures. So, big change in the 2020 NEC. The reason that this was changed is it's really the only viable way to work on a service disconnect and still comply with NFPA 70E and OSHA requirements. If I'm in a service disconnect and there's only 1 switch, then I can shut it off, and the line side terminals of the service disconnect have to be guarded. That's also a code change that happened in Article 230. So when I look at these things, this is a good example. I've got these little barriers. Remember, they added those in Article 408 in the 2017. For service conductors, you have to have these little barriers over the terminals. Well, in the 2020 code, they moved that from Article 408 over to 230, which means it applies not just to panel boards, but to fuse disconnects enclosures as well. So if I'm in the service disconnect, and I've only got 1 service disconnect in the enclosure, when I shut that off, I can actually work in a de-energized condition because the line side is guarded. If I have up to 6 service disconnects in 1 enclosure, shutting those off, I still am exposed to live parts. And that would require me to get the utility involved and have a scheduled shutdown. And let's just be honest, people aren't willing to do that. Unfortunately, people are more willing to work energized than they are to call a utility and get it shut off. And I mean, you hate to say it, but you can see where a person makes that decision. It's pretty tough to to tell a homeowner that I need to call the utility and have them come out and remove the meter so that I can change a breaker in the panel, and then call them back and have them come out 6 hours later. That's kind of the idea, to establish a safe working environment. Another big change that happened in Article 230 is 230.85, emergency disconnects. For 1 and 2 family dwellings, a readily accessible outdoor disconnect that disconnects the service conductors is required. Okay, this is taken in my area. I live in the Salt Lake City, Utah area. We have installed outdoor service disconnects for 50 years. So this is not new to us at all. In some parts of the country, you would never see a service disconnect on the outside of the house, and that's okay. That's never been a requirement of the code until the 2020 version. So now you need a readily accessible outdoor disconnect for 1 and 2 family dwellings, but it can be one of several things. It can be 1 or more service disconnects marked emergency disconnect, service disconnect. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't tell adults what to do. I think this is the easiest way to satisfy this rule, and I think it's probably the most, I don't want to use the word safest, but it's, if you install an actual legitimate service disconnect on the outside of the house, you're going to avoid potential problems with inspectors. Take a look one more time at this photograph. This panel, of course, has my meter, and it has an outdoor service disconnect rated 200 amps. Now, this one has provisions for other breakers in that same equipment, and they're downstream of the 200 amp breaker. So you can add a breaker here for your air conditioner. Makes it easy to do some generator things or solar. It's a very versatile and really a useful piece of equipment. If you install this one, I really think you're going to enjoy it. But here's the main thing. When I look at that, I know for a fact that is the service disconnect. And I know what the rules are at the service disconnect. That's where your neutral and your ground come together, right? Some people call it like the grounding bullseye, and that's a phrase I've never really gotten into. But this is where your neutral and your ground connect together. This is where you take your grounding electrode conductor. This is where your 4-wire circuits originate from. If you install this piece of equipment, you know what the code rules are. There are other options, like number 2. 1 or more meter disconnect switches marked emergency disconnect, meter disconnect, not service equipment. Okay, I want to show you the photograph here because this is a common misconception that people are screwing up right now. This is a meter bypass. This does the opposite of what we're trying to do. We need a meter disconnect. A meter disconnect is simply a disconnect upstream of the meter. So option 2 says you could have, you got your service conductors coming to your house. You could go to a disconnect, then your meter, then enter the building. And that's kind of what number 3 says as well. Other listed disconnect switches or circuit breakers on the supply side of the service disconnect that are suitable for use as service equipment, but are marked emergency disconnect, not service equipment. Okay. If I go to Article 100 and I look up service equipment, it says the service equipment is pretty much the first place where you can shut off and control the utility. So you put a switch that's listed as a service disconnect on the outside of the house, but then you put a sticker on it that says this is not the service disconnect. Can you see what's going to happen when you run into an inspector? You're going to run into an inspector and he's going to say, dude, that's your service disconnect. How come you don't have your ground going out here? How come you pulled 3 conductors instead of 4 conductors? And you're like, well, no, that's not the service disconnect because I put this sticker on here that says it's not the service disconnect. Putting a sticker on something doesn't change the definition. You know what I mean? The first place that you can kill the power and you're intended to control the power, that's kind of what Article 100 calls a service disconnect, or service equipment. So, again, I'm not telling you what to do, but I very strongly recommend that you put a real service disconnect on the outside of the house and you do your neutral to ground connection there and you install your grounding electrode conductor system there and then you pull 4-wire feeder circuits from there to your panel or panels plural. Again, we've been doing it west of, probably Colorado and west. We've been doing it for 50 years. And it's very simple. You get used to it very quickly. But most importantly is it doesn't leave any room for debate. You look at it, you know what the rules are, you know how to wire it, and you just don't get in a fight with the inspector. So those are a couple of big changes in Article 230 in the 2020 NEC. Let me see what that chat board looks like. Let's see. I'm going to have to bring up my chat board. Oh, I'm loving this chat board. Definitely, yeah, I know, right? Detroit, Michigan. Kevin, I thought you were in California for some reason. You're in Michigan. Okay. Lockport, New York. Jeffrey Bauer says, do you think manufacturers will re-engineer those meter packs to make them individual compartments? Well, I think they're going to have to do something. So talking to our friend Don, he is saying that they're going to try to rewrite the product standard for these meter packs and try to justify what they're doing as individual compartments. And I don't see it, man. Look, the intent is you can take the cover off and work on it in a de-energized state, and I don't see how you get there. So, Jeffrey, I think the manufacturers will do something, but I don't know what they're going to do or if they're going to be able to make it comply. I think they'd have to be an individual. You'd have to have like individual little covers for each circuit breaker. I think that's the intent of this rule. Okay. Bob Crane, 310.15b7, 83% still allowed in a meter combo with AC breakers in it. Fantastic question. Holy smokes. Let me bring up, I'm so glad you brought that up. Let me get a graphic. Article 310. Okay. So, Bob, this is what you're talking about. You can go with the 83% rule, and in fact, in the 2012 code, in the 2020 code, they actually put the table back in that we knew and love. It's called Table 310.12. But here's a panel, and it's ugly, and I hate all the no locks. But let's make that a little bigger. So these feeder conductors, you got your service conductors on the left. They go through the meter. They hit a 200 amp disconnect. These feeder conductors supply a 200 amp panel in the basement. And this is the argument that I've had for 10 years with Code Making Panel 6, and they agreed now, and they did clarify this. These supply the entire load, so they can be sized at 166 amps, so 83%. Here's my issue, ever since they started playing around with this table. Let's say my air conditioner is inside the house, 40 amp air conditioner. If my 40 amp air conditioner comes from the panel inside, then yeah, this circuit feeds all the loads, and we're good to go. But here's the argument that I had. How stupid is it that I could remove the 40 amp breaker from the basement panel and put it outside, removing 40 amps of load from this circuit, and now my wires are too small? Before they were fine. But by removing 40 amps of load, I've somehow made them too small. So what it says in this section is feeders for a dwelling would never have to be larger than what A or B would require. So in other words, if I took out that air conditioner, snapped it in up here, then these feeders would no longer be carrying the entire load, but they could be sized as though they were carrying the entire load. And I still think there's work to be done in 310.12. But I do think that answers it and helps out. Okay. Jeff Thompson, can it be a non-fused disconnect, the outside disconnect for a house? Yeah, it can be, if it's marked as suitable for use as service equipment. But I shouldn't say that. I think a meter disconnect switch would be used. I think if you have a non-fused disconnect, I don't believe they make them that has the suitable for use of service equipment marking. I don't believe. They might, but the answer is yes. You can put a meter disconnect switch or a service rated switch outside and then put a sticker on it and say, I know this says it's the service disconnect, but here's my sticker. Now it's not the service disconnect. So to me, you're begging for an argument, I think. And to me, if you put a sticker on it, it doesn't change what it is. You know what I mean? It doesn't change what it is. It still meets the definition of service equipment. So, all right. Cool. Well, I am loving the new chat feature where I can see everybody's comment loud and clear. Oh, love it. Perfect. All right. So I will edit this here in a few minutes, and I'll put in the link, I'll put the registration links so that you guys can join the classes for the next 4 Wednesdays. And I hope you guys do. If you can't do it on the live WebEx stream that we'll be doing, you can do it on Facebook, you can do it on YouTube. I will be saving those, so you'll be able to see them later if you can't join us live. So with that said, I think I will go ahead and wrap this thing up. So it's good seeing you all, and please be safe. Take care, everyone.